Welcome back to the channel, everyone. My name is Joe Buskins. This is our family's boat shop. Behind me is our 29-foot charter boat that we built here in our shop and also run in our day-to-day charter service during the summer months. And the weather is bad because there's a hurricane out in the Gulf right now, so no fishing for us for the next few days. But it is time for some engine service. We got some genuine Yamaha engine oil, lower unit lube, and we're also going to do fuel filters every 100 hours. That is part of our charter operation to keep these motors in top tune. We're going to go ahead and fire these things off though and warm up these motors because I've got a cool little apparatus for pumping the oil out of these engines, and the oil needs to be nice and warm before you do that. So I'm going to turn on a little water pressure. Fire this thing off. All right, so we have backed our 29 back into the shop. We let those motors thoroughly warm up. I went ahead and did both of them, and a lot of people are kind of curious about the maintenance on 2 versus 1. I find that it takes just a marginal amount more time to do 2 engines versus the 1 because you've got everything there to do it. Now, having a good setup, I've got a nice little work table. We've got all of our supplies handy. We've got a trash can, got some rubber gloves on to keep burnt motor oil off of you. And this is a little time saver here, and I've had this around for quite some time. This is a Jabsco. It's a model 178600012. Now they may have changed that at some point, but it plugs in right over here on the positive and the negative. So my cameraman can zoom in there. We got a hot lead right there off of the starter. And then we got a ground lead coming off of our main engine harness. And this thing's got a little switch on it that when I'm ready to activate this thing right on the bottom, I can. And what I like to do, I went ahead and loosened the oil fill cap there on top of the motor. Your yellow fill cap, it's gonna be, there you go. Good job, cameraman. I hope he's showing that. I went ahead and loosened that so we don't have any kind of vapor lock. I'm gonna go ahead and pull that dipstick, and we wanna make sure our little probe is nice and clean there before we run that down in the motor. And I'm gonna power that on for a second, be sure it's got some suction going, and then feed it in right through the dipstick, right till it gets, and you can see the oil coming up. There we go. Once it gets primed, it'll go really well. Sometimes it takes a second to get there. All right. Kind of here, kind of kick into another gear. Now, a lot of times what I do to save time while our little pump is running, and it can either be vertical or it can be horizontal, and while it is drawing that oil out, we've already got our catch pan for our lower unit fluid. So we're not wasting time. We're not waiting on the pump to fully cycle. And I've used, that's old Craftsman right there, but you're gonna need a big, I like a big heavy duty flat screwdriver. And on these 150 Yamahas, 175, 200, your oil drain is gonna be right there at the nose cone. And I find using a crescent wrench gives you a lot of control to just crack that loose. And we're gonna do the bottom one first. And you notice very little oil is coming out. Now you guys that are pros out there and used to doing your own maintenance, you're probably used to that, but always wanna do the bottom one first, and then once we crack this upper one, you'll notice the oil is going to come out much faster once you get that vacuum off of there. So that's what we're doing. We're going to go ahead and drain this main engine crankcase and let that lower unit oil flow all out of there. Now sometimes when we get down to the very end of draining the oil out of here, I may tilt the motor up or down a little bit and try to get as much oil as possible. Now, if you don't have one of these electric pumps, it's a good investment if you're going to change your oil regularly, but they make ones that are vacuum pumps that don't even have an electric motor. You just draw a vacuum and it sucks the oil Or if you don't even want to go that route, with some of the Yamahas, they've got a, there's a rubberized neck here, and there's like a 14mm screw that you can drain the oil out that way. But on this particular model, you've actually got to remove this shroud right here. So it's like 6 fasteners, and then there's like a 14mm bolt, and the drain is going to be right over here in this region, and you can just drain it out that way. But as much as we change the oil, it's worth having a little pump, and that's one less fastener and one less washer I have to pull out during the process. Check this out. It's been about 5 minutes, and you can see now that we have nearly pumped all the oil. Now sometimes, like for example, just then I lowered the motor and we were able to get a little bit more oil to come out of there. Some people are concerned about getting all the oil out of there, but I've talked to a lot of mechanics. As a matter of fact, a lot of mechanics in shops use these pretty standard. As long as you tilt the motor a couple different ways and make sure you get every little last bit. And y'all notice, see now I tilted this motor down a little further, and we're getting a little more oil, and we have nearly completed draining our lower unit lube. And in the meantime, I came over here on this side and we're prepping for spinning our oil filter loose. I went ahead and tucked a couple shop towels, and I'm going to be using a filter wrench that's got kind of a swivel head on it. You can use these little sockets that are made to go on top of the filters as well, but honestly I've had better luck with this style that kind of cinches down, and I've wrapped a little electrical tape around this one. It seems to give it a little better grip, and it doesn't scratch up the filter. So I've just taken some black electrical tape and kind of made it so that it's a little bit easier on the filter canisters. I don't like scratching them if I can help it. So now you can see we've got nearly all. Want to make sure we've got absolutely 100% out of there. I'm pretty confident we do. I'm going to stop here in just a second. It's got a little switch right on the bottom of this thing. So those are incredibly handy. I want to go ahead and pull the little electrical leads off of there. And I know it's kind of tight in there, folks, but this little filter wrench, I've already cracked that one loose, but basically you're going to be able to grab it and spin this thing off of there. Now generally you can put these filters on by hand and maybe give them just a tiny snug up with a wrench, but you're not supposed to crush those filters down there. So if you're tempted to do that at home, don't. It's basically snug them up till they come tight on the machine surface, and then maybe just a little more, and maybe my cameraman can reach in there and kind of see. I want to go ahead and spin that filter off, and I'm going to have a shop towel ready. Rubber gloves and shop towels, always a good idea. And again, you can see that I've tucked a few in there around the base just to be sure if we lose any oil at all. There we go, that wasn't too bad. Not too shabby. And I can't overemphasize having a nice work table, workspace is a huge plus. Now, sometimes these filters, sometimes you'll get some oil in that little basin there, and that's what I'm doing right now, is soaking some of that up before I spin a new filter on. Otherwise, you'll have a little puddle of used motor oil sitting down in there, and that's one of the reasons I put that couple shop towels at the base. Now I know this is not the norm. If you're just tuning into the channel to see how to do this engine service, we have well over 100 videos, everything from documenting the ground up build of this 29 footer here to all kinds of fiberglass and gel coat DIY projects for you folks at home to help you save time and money. To put it in perspective, like this engine service, it was about $250 worth of service parts to change this oil, to buy the parts. But if you went and had this done, you're looking at probably $600 or $700 for an engine service. And for a guy like me, the convenience of just being able to do it in shop, like I'm doing it, it's after hours, the weather's bad, so I couldn't be fishing anyway. So it makes sense. It makes sense to try to save money where you can. Now, if it's in over your head or you don't feel comfortable doing something, you're certified mechanics. You guys, the guys that went to school to do this kind of stuff, anything internal or anything major, I'm going straight back to the dealership. But your routine maintenance, especially when you're using good, genuine factory replacement parts, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of going Yamaha for Yamaha, Suzuki for Suzuki, spending a little extra money there and getting your factory certified parts, always a good idea. So what we've got here, we've got a fresh filter getting ready to go on the motor. I'm going to get rid of that right there. Now, oil soaked rags are always something to be cautious of as well, folks, and sometimes you may see me throw them in a trash can while I'm working, but then a lot of times after I'm done, immediately afterward, I will go and take it into an external trash bin. My hands are slippy there. Ha! I wonder why, right? Got motor oil. So we've got a brand new fresh Yamaha filter. I always like to take a little bit of fresh motor oil there and make sure that gasket around the perimeter has got a little lubricant, and then just nice and easy. Again, I know it's kind of tight to see in there. Hopefully my cameraman can zoom in. You'll be able to tell when this thing finds the thread. Sometimes you gotta just lightly spin it, and if it doesn't go on there easy, do not force it. Find out the reason. See, that one is spinning up on there very nicely. And now, generally speaking, hand tight is going to be plenty. Now, I work with my hands all the time. I got pretty good grip strength. You can sometimes use a little wrench to put just a tiny bit of a turn on there, but you do not want to over tighten those gaskets. They are not meant to be really ratcheted down on. So just bear that in mind. It's just a nice, really good hand tight if you're used to working with your hands, and if not, maybe just a slight snug up with the wrench, but certainly no more than that. So we have got our filter back on, and we've got a fresh quart of the 80W90 gear case lube, and you may want to look into buying one of these little inexpensive gear lube pumps, and basically you screw the cap off, screw that on, and it's got a fitting that's made to go with different motors. This one is specific to Yamaha, and we have thoroughly drained our lower unit there, and this will spin on just nice and easy. Typically I can get it to jump in there for me. There we go. Now, I did purge this line a little bit and ran some fresh fluid through it before I attached it to the lower unit there. All right, and we are going to proceed to start pumping. You can see there's fluid. Sometimes when you get a bubble, you can see it moving through there, but we're going to pump this thing up until we see some fluid come out of this upper fill hole there, or vent hole, if you will. Now's a good time to ask you folks, if you're enjoying the content, please remember to like, subscribe, comment, share, tell a friend. If you got other social media platforms that you can tell folks about the channel. Our goal here is to inform you folks with good money saving, time saving, professional level boat builder, boat repairman advice. And the more viewers and more likes, shares, comments we have, the more the channel will grow. The more channel grows, the more of this kind of stuff we can do. And I would love to hear y'all's suggestions for content. This is a little different than what we normally do. It's mostly fiberglass and gel coat, but I think we're going to start doing a little more mechanical stuff. And if you own a boat, that's part of it for sure. Okay, folks, we're moving on to the next phase. We have pumped nearly 1 full quart, or more or less 1 full quart into our lower unit here, and it started to make a few little bubbles. You'll see, like when you pump, you'll see little bubbles. And we are nearing full right now. I want to be just absolutely sure that we got plenty of fluid in there, but I also wanted to show y'all a bottle change, how easy it is, and that's what I typically do. And we are going to give this thing just a second. I'm going to tilt it up nice, flat, and level, and I'm going to pump a little more oil in there, and we're looking for this fluid to come out this upper drain tube. I like to pump it till there is plenty running out. I want to get any bubbles that's in there, get a nice full lower crankcase. This is the life of your motors, folks, and maintenance on these things. And that noise you hear in the background is our electric pump pumping the oil out of the other engine. So now we're going to jump on over to, we've got our little oil drain plugs that were in the lower unit of that one, and we've got an old gasket and a fresh gasket. You're going to want to replace those every time. That's your Yamaha part number for these particular ones. The old ones, you don't want to reuse them. They're going to get brittle and hard. As a matter of fact, I'm going to throw those away so there's no chance. And the one that's tapered is going to be the bottom one. There's a little magnet on there that'll pick up any little bits of debris. I always like to make sure to clean it very thoroughly before reinstalling it. But we're actually going to install the upper one first, and that's going to create an airlock or a vacuum, and it's going to help keep fluid. So I'm going to give this one or two more little pumps just to be sure. Got plenty of flow out of there. And then very carefully and cleanly, remember not to cross thread. If it doesn't go in easy, don't force it. And again, these are not meant to be torqued down on super heavy. If you've got good hand strength, it's like they come snug, and maybe a quarter of a turn is all you need. You do not have to get crazy with these things at all. All right, and we've got our lower one ready. Make sure to keep it clean and debris free. You want to do this quickly because when you pull this plug, you're going to get a little fluid out, but it's not as much as you might imagine. I know it's kind of hard. The camera angle is a little tricky there, folks, and I apologize about that. Go. Quickly get that back in there. There we go. Just get it into place and then get your screwdriver in play. Same deal. It should go in very easy. If it doesn't go in easy, stop. Once it comes snug, and then one good, maybe a quarter turn, hand tight is all you're going to need. And then we're going to obviously, you're going to want to clean up any of that gear case lube. Don't want that going back in the environment. Want to kind of clean things up, keep everything looking nice and fresh. All right, very good. And that is pretty much your lower unit. Just remember, one of these little inexpensive lower gear pumps, they can be had. Matter of fact, I will be sure to find a link through Amazon, and if you look below the video's description, I'll try to link the little electric pump, a vacuum pump, and then also the little lower unit pump for your convenience there, folks. So here we go, folks. We have made it to the next step. Getting ready to pour in some Yamaha lube. I do recommend going with factory oils, whatever brand you have. I've always done that, had good success with it. And got a nice little clean filter, or a funnel rather, ready to go. And we've already obviously replaced our filters. Now I found that these Yamaha canisters, if you kind of push down in the middle, they got a little tab that'll pop up. You should be able to peel that right off the top. And these are Yamaha 150s, and they recommend 4.5 US quarts without filter. If you're doing a filter change, it's 4.7. But Yamaha's, as a rule, you're going to have a engine oil capacity sticker or plate, and whatever yours says for your specific engine or your manual. Now again, this is just for the 150 Yamahas. Keep that in mind. They're all going to vary depending on size. Bigger motor is going to carry more fuel, and so we've got obviously 1 US gallon or 4 quarts right there, and nice and easy. Again, you want to make sure your filter or your funnel is nice and clean. I don't know why I keep saying filter. Maybe because we've been replacing filters. Now, as a general rule too, folks, even though we did replace the oil filter and it says 4.7 US quarts, I generally like to slightly underfill. So I'm going to put 4.5 quarts in, and I like to run the motor and check it on the dipstick, and usually I will add just a touch more. That's just me personally, but it is not a good idea to overfill your engine. Overfilling the engine can cause some damage, and so if you accidentally overfill, you're going to want to do whatever it takes to get it back at the recommended levels for your particular engine. We're also going to be doing the fuel filters, both the ones on the motor, and we run the big Yamaha canister style fuel water separators. Dirty fuel or fuel contamination, water in the fuel, probably one of the biggest problems you're going to run into. My Yamahas personally, very rare to have any issues outside of like dirty fuel. I've seen that happen a few times. And the maintenance on these things is important. 100 hours typically. Of course, you could shorten that up a little bit, I imagine, if you really wanted to be really careful with things. So there's 4 quarts, and then I'm going to go with a 1/2 quart or just a touch over half. And again, if you have twins, I haven't noticed it being a whole lot more work to do the engine service on 2 versus just 1, because you've already got all the equipment, everything. Yep, that's just a touch over 1/2 quart there. So we will double check that. I'm going to go ahead and put the oil in the second engine. Y'all don't need to see that, but we're going to be jumping right to the fuel filters there on the engine, and then we've got some big Yamaha filters down there in the rigging compartment. All right, folks, so we got our 4.5, 4.6 quarts of oil in both motors. Now again, I don't like to risk overfilling them. Finger tight on that little oil drain plug, and we are moving right on to the Yamaha fuel filter. Now, many of these kits, you can go online and actually get a service kit where you've got all your oil and filter and everything there. You just want to be sure you've got exactly the right part. So we are moving on to the on-engine fuel element or fuel filter. Now this boat has two elements, but this is the engine mounted one. This little sensor wire here, you're going to want to disconnect that before you go to spin this filter off. Otherwise, it's going to twist this little wire like crazy. And that is a sensor, if I'm not mistaken, for the presence of water in your fuel system. And I find that you can either get a little filter wrench that will go around this little canister. I would not recommend using anything like channel locks or pliers. A lot of times you may damage that little housing, and it's not cheap to replace. We've got a 10mm socket with a bit of an extension, and I find that taking these 2 bolts off to the side, taking these bolts out. And again, if you're new to doing engine maintenance on Yamahas, you will find that there are a lot of 10mm seems to be very popular size for a lot of the fittings on here. And I tend to prefer hand tools. I've seen a couple guys online using impact tools or electric drills, impact tools to do this kind of work. Now, it's one thing if you want to use them to remove the parts, but I'm a big fan of starting everything by hand and then running it in by hand, because a lot of the, for example, you got aluminum components there and it's quite easy to strip out an aluminum thread. So I like good old-fashioned hand tools. Now, with the bracket loose, a lot of times these can be quite tight. You're going to need a little bit of hand strength there, but it is much easier to get these loose with this bracket disconnected. And you can see that if you tried to spin this filter without disconnecting that little sensor wire on the bottom, you're going to create some problems. I also, as a note, put a couple blue shop towels there underneath that filter housing, and I like to kind of just see what we got going on. That fuel should be clean. Looks quite nice in there, but I always like to empty the old fuel. I'm going to set it off to the side. And sorry that we've got kind of a funny angle here. It's a little awkward sometimes to get. That should pull right out of there. There we go. I try to use gloves when I can, working with gasoline and with used motor oil, probably a really good idea. And you'll notice there is an orientation to these. The bottom is not going to have any kind of a fitting. The top is going to have a little O-ring there, and this one, there's a note in here that this is specific to a particular motor. This is the 6P3. That should be on the housing, and I'm seeing that, the 6P3. So you just want to be sure that you've got the right components. A lot of the Yamaha stuff, some of it may actually interchange, but you can see quite a difference in the two. And we run from a reputable service station, and we've got good pre-filters, but we run a lot of fuel through these things. Now I like to, I've seen some guys actually take this little filter and just kind of drop it in the canister, and then they put the canister up in place. But if at all possible, I'm going to recommend seating that little filter, making sure it's seated up in that little, there's a little housing, if you will. It kind of receives that. And normally I like to refill. Now you can just pump this back up with fuel from the system, but normally I will take some clean fuel. That O-ring looks really good. Now sometimes you can take a little bit of clean motor oil if you think you want to and lubricate. Sometimes I'll just put a little bit of gasoline around the perimeter and seat that up there. You may get a little spillage. I overfilled slightly when I filled that canister. I tell you folks, sometimes videoing and doing the work, it can be a challenge. And it doesn't need to be terribly tight. It's pretty much a hand tight deal. That's going to be good enough. Same deal for running these bolts in. Generally, I like to put them on the socket. Get our wire started the right direction and start them by hand if at all possible. There we go. Got number one going in. And before I snug that one up, I like to go ahead and start the second one. If you've ever had trouble with a bolt starting, sometimes folks will run one bolt in and tighten it all the way, and that can cause problems for the second bolt or the third bolt to line up. But I find that if you kind of do them, get each one started and then finish running them all the way in. I don't have the torque specs right in front of me on this particular engine. Usually your service manual is going to have that, but I find just finger tight and maybe just a quarter turn is all you need. You do not need to go crazy with over tightening these. And then you've got this little sensor wire here that's going to snap. Going to snap right back into place. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. There we go. All right. So we've got one fuel filter changed. I'm going to go ahead and do the other, and then we're going to jump over to the big filters here, the big pre-filters, which I think is an important maintenance item for sure. So we're moving right on to our fuel water separator. Now this is a large canister style. I hope the camera can possibly pick up that part number, but it's pretty standard across the Yamaha board, or again, if you own a Suzuki or a Honda, which I've owned all three of the major brands of Japanese outboard motors. I've even owned some Mercuries and some Evinrudes. I'm going to use a filter wrench to get this one rolling. Now this is an adjustable filter wrench, and sometimes it can be a little tricky. There we go. And I tend to do my fuel filters every service, every engine service, which again is right there at 100, every 100 hours. For us, clean fuel is so important, and it seems like that is probably one of the main issues. I want to put some paper towels there underneath that filter as we spin it off. I hope the light from the camera showing you folks. I'm kind of having to do this blind a little bit. Just spin her off nice and easy. Some boats are much easier to access than others, but this can save you a considerable amount of money, or sometimes if you are having some engine problems, starting with adding a fuel filter can be one of those things. Not all boats come with a large canister style filter like this, and I would say that is probably one of the best additions. We replaced this one back in July, the 10th of July, so a lot of times not a bad idea to write the date when you put that new filter on there. And also a real good idea to check the housing. I hope the light will show. You want to be sure you got a nice clean non-pitted surface where this gasket seals or seats up in there. If you do have pitting, you're going to want to maybe clean that with a little bit of Scotch-Brite pad if it's just mild corrosion. Especially aluminum ones can do that. Those are actually stainless steel ones, which I really like the stainless steel. And these are going to come wrapped in plastic. And carefully open that seal up. Good to know how to do this kind of stuff. Sometimes you just can't get anybody to come and do it for you, and with the cost of everything these days, you can save a lot of money. So one little trick that will save you a little bit of effort when you're trying to prime the system up is I poured some fresh, clean gasoline, and a lot of times what we'll do is we will add it to the filter before spinning it on, because sometimes it can be tricky to get a prime on an empty filter. So this helps the fuel pump and the fuel system and your priming bulb get a little head start there. It doesn't have to be completely full, but if it's mostly full, they hold a surprising amount of fuel there. That's going to be enough. That was nearly a quart. And I've got a little bit of fresh, clean motor oil that I like to do on all my gaskets, is just give a little bit on that seal there. One important note is you want to be sure that the old gasket has unseated itself and comes out with the old filter. And I know we don't have an awful lot of room there. I'm gonna try to give you folks the best angle possible. It should spin on nice and easy. If there's any resistance, you'll want to take a moment and just evaluate it, maybe back it off of there. Again, sometimes if you feel some resistance, it could be the old filter that's still in the way. And generally, these filters, again, I've got pretty good grip strength because I work with my hands all the time, but about as tight as you can tighten it by hand is usually good enough. You can put a little bit of filter wrench on there if you want to, but you got to be super careful about over tightening that. So got our filters done. We've got our engine oil. We got engine oil filter, lower unit lube, our secondary filter on our engine. I'm going to go ahead and spin on the other filter, and we're going to go crank these things up, bring them up to temperature, double check everything. And I got one more maintenance tip I want to show you folks before we're all done. Another important maintenance item, folks, is a good quality marine grease. And we've got the motors tilted up, and there's several little fittings. We call those a zerk fitting. You got 1, 2, and then there's another right there. You're going to want to check your individual motor and just kind of be sure that at every service that's going to pop right on. And I'll usually give it 3 or 4 pumps on the grease gun just to keep everything. You can see we got a little bit of grease coming out there, so I'm not going to put much more than that. A couple on this one as well. That's for your steering shaft. You can see it pushing out right there as I'm, there you go. That's probably going to be plenty. And then typically like to put a little bit where your steering cylinders hit on the motor, top of those trim and tilt cylinders, rather, not steering. And there's one on the other side right there where they make contact on the motor. Good idea to hit that. Now there's a couple grease fittings on this side as well, kind of duplicates of the ones on the other. I know the lighting is not fantastic. I apologize about that, folks, but it's good idea to go ahead and hit each one equally with a couple squirts there. And what we're going to do, we're going to pull this thing out, crank up these motors, kind of double check all your connections, which is a really good idea. Be sure we don't have any leaks or anything not behaving the way it's supposed to. And then we'll do one final treatment. We're going to spray some Yamaha lube over the whole motor, inside the cowling and everything, to kind of give it some corrosion protection and resistance to moisture while this thing's out on the water. So keep thinking of little extra items that while we're doing this that you might want to be aware of. Occasionally I'll notice when we're doing service, salt water will evaporate apparently, and you'll get sometimes a little bit of a salt residue. And what I will do is use some good fresh water on one of these little zap sprayers to dilute that and kind of clean the pan, go around. There are drains in the pan where when you rinse these motors and water gets in, it can get out. But I think sometimes the heat of the engine and the salt that may get in from when we're offshore and you get splashes. And so I do like to, before I spray our Yamaha Shield over the whole engine, I like to rinse around the perimeter of this thing, and I kind of will just shoot down on either side, and you can see there the water is running out. So these engines are made to drain any water in there, but that's just good clean fresh water. And I will, again, right down where the engine meets the block is typically, matter of fact, you can kind of see over here the same, right down in that gap. I hope the camera picks that up. I like to just rinse that a little and get any salt residue out of these motors. Salt is not your friend for sure. And our boat sees heavy duty use. I mean, this is a charter boat and we're working for a living and we're out on the water an awful lot. But I guarantee you, if we can make our motors live, and I've been running 4-stroke outboard motors, and Yamahas in particular, for probably well over 25 years. I've owned dozens of them, and I am not a Yamaha technician. We've just done hundreds of oil changes and just wanted to share with you folks how I do it. Now, if you're at all unsure about this or your technical ability, obviously motors are very expensive, and if you're not absolutely comfortable doing this, then I would recommend taking it to your certified dealer. This is kind of just, I thought it would be interesting for you folks that have been following the channel to see some of our day-to-day maintenance routine, and maybe it'll help you appreciate when you book a fishing charter, there's a lot more to it than us, the 4 hours or 6 hours we may be on the boat. We are constantly working and maintaining these boats so that when you get on, they start right up, they run smoothly, everything's properly maintained, and we spend a lot of time and a lot of money making sure that happens. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna let that kind of just run its course, and we should be ready to fire these engines off. Now again, if you're doing this at home, now would be a really good time. You just want to double check everything. You can see there we've got oil almost to the high fill mark, so we're good to go there. Our fuel filter on the side here is nice and tight, and I'm going to crank this engine up with the engine cover off so that we can monitor this engine as it's running and make sure that everything is as it should be. So hey, what I'm actually going to just walk right on over. And that's one thing I do like about the 150 Yamahas and smaller, is they do not have the high speed pickups on their nose cone, so you can kind of just go with the conventional, I call them ear muffs, the ear muff style flushers. Fire this thing off. There you go. Now sometimes it may take a moment or two for your little telltale, the little stream of water that'll come out of the motor. But if it's more than a couple minutes and you don't see it, you may want to be sure, there you go, you may want to be sure you're getting plenty of water coming out of the little telltale. So we're going to give this motor about 10 minutes or so of runtime, and I'm going to make sure that everything is as it should be. One more fantastic maintenance item is the YamaLube Yama Shield. This is a rust and corrosion protection, and it's a waterproof lubricant. Now what I like to do when I'm all done with everything is just give a light, well, I say light, but it's actually a pretty heavy duty spray down all over any metallic parts that I can see. I don't want to spray it on any of the belts or anything, but everything that's metallic, you got your latches. I'll even spray a little bit on my gaskets for the motor. Now I have already sprayed from the front, typically getting up in the boat and spraying backwards, and then getting outside the boat and just coating everything with a nice film. And then what I like to do is leave the cowlings off for a bit and kind of let some of those fumes flash off just a little. It's just a personal thing, but I feel like it kind of does a better job rather than just trapping all of the airborne vapors underneath there. It's just kind of something I feel like is probably a little bit safer. But anyway, that is our general maintenance rundown. Now remember, if any of this is over your head and don't feel comfortable doing it, consider just this for entertainment purposes, but this is what we do on our charter boat every 100 hours to keep our ship shape. If you enjoyed the video, want to see more of this kind of stuff, as well as tons of fiberglass and gel coat work, please remember to like, subscribe, comment, share. It's Captain Joe here with Island Marine Charters Fish Bump TV. My son Logan is my fantastic cameraman working hard behind the scenes, and we'll catch you folks in the next episode.